The vast council chamber, located on the neutral moon of Valdera, was filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. The air crackled with tension as the leaders of dozens of species, ranging from massive towering beings to small, insect-like creatures, gathered around a giant holographic table. The room itself was designed to amplify the solemnity of the occasion, its high-vaulted ceilings and ancient stone pillars speaking of ages past. This was not just any gathering. This was a council that had the power to decide the fate of the universe. The topic of discussion had been clear from the moment the assembly convened: war. The different species, each with their own grievances, had finally reached a point where diplomacy and peace were no longer viable options. The council had been debating for days, each race giving impassioned speeches about their reasons for conflict. Some spoke of ancient grudges, some of territorial disputes, and others of the suffering caused by the expansion of certain empires. The idea of peace seemed almost laughable to them now. But all that was about to change, and no one in the room could predict how it would unfold. The atmosphere in the chamber was thick with the weight of the decision to be made. Every vote counted. The fate of millions of planets, each teetering on the edge of war, rested on the outcome of this vote. It was not just the future of the galaxy at stake, but the lives of every sentient being that called this universe home. As the debate continued, the atmosphere became charged with emotion. Species that had been allies for millennia were now at odds with each other. Old friendships were crumbling, replaced with suspicion and fear. The council members, once calm and composed, now showed signs of frustration and anger. The voices of the speakers grew louder, their words more heated, as the tension in the room reached a boiling point. At the center of the chaos stood a human, a representative of Earth, seated alone at the edge of the table. It was an unusual position for a human, given that Earth had never been a dominant player in galactic politics. Humanity was still seen by many as a young, naive species, too small to have a significant impact on the grand scale of galactic affairs. Yet, here they were, represented by this one individual, someone who had just arrived at this council for the first time. The human, named Marcus Orwin, had been quiet during most of the debate. He had listened as species of all shapes and sizes passionately called for war. The arguments were convincing. The alien representative spoke of long-standing injustices, of entire civilizations that had been wronged by others. The human had watched them, absorbing their words, his mind racing as he tried to come to terms with what was happening. But the longer he listened, the more he realized that war was not the solution. There had to be another way, a path that didn't lead to total destruction. But Marcus also knew that speaking up now would not be easy. The species here were powerful, proud, and full of anger. The very idea of a human, someone considered insignificant in the grand scheme of galactic politics, challenging their views, seemed absurd. He wasn't a general or a diplomat. He wasn't even a leader of his own people, just an ordinary man who had been thrust into this extraordinary situation. The time had come. The vote was about to begin. Marcus had never felt such pressure. The eyes of the entire council were on him, waiting to see how he would react to the growing hostility. The leaders around the table began to prepare themselves for the vote, some eager to cast their ballots in favor of war, others unsure but still leaning toward aggression. The weight of the moment settled in Marcus's chest. The future of everything, he knew, hung in the balance. As the council chairperson, a towering alien from the Vortan species, called for the vote to begin, a sudden silence fell over the room. The heavy metallic clang of the Vortan's voice echoed in the chamber, signaling the start of the process. The holographic screens in front of each representative flickered to life, displaying the options: vote for war and vote for peace. Every member of the council knew what they had to do. The galaxy had been on the brink of war for centuries, and this vote was their chance to finally settle things. No one expected anything different. Yet as the first vote was cast, a strange sense of unease filled the room. The first few votes were in favor of war, as expected. Species that had been at war for decades, or even centuries, saw this as the only way to resolve their disputes. But then something unexpected happened. Marcus stood. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his seat. The room went silent. His movement was almost imperceptible at first, but it was enough to command attention. All eyes turned to him. For a moment, Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. Should he stay silent and let the vote happen as everyone expected him to? Or should he do something no one anticipated? Speak up, challenge the galaxy's most powerful beings, and fight for something better. The suspense in the room was palpable. No one knew what he was going to say. Would he join the chorus of war or stand against it? Marcus opened his mouth to speak, and the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Marcus Orwin stood. Every species, every leader, and every representative from across the galaxy was now waiting for the human to speak. His actions had already set the tone for something unexpected. A human, one of the youngest, least powerful species in the galaxy, was about to challenge the votes of the universe's most powerful races. Marcus could feel the weight of the eyes on him, the sharp gaze of the Vortan chairperson, the curious stares of the Zalthar, the proud and silent Kilari, and the cold calculating looks of the Tizoth. His palms were sweating, his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. There was no going back now. He had to speak. The future of the galaxy depended on it. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly, at first. But as he continued, his words grew stronger, more resolute. I understand the anger that has led us here, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber. I know that each of you has faced countless hardships. Each of you has a history of struggle, pain, and loss. I'm not here to deny that. But what I am here to say is this. War is not the answer. The room fell silent again. There were no murmurs of agreement or dissent, just silence. The alien leaders who had spoken so passionately about the need for war now turned their attention fully to the human standing before them. The contrast between Marcus and the towering beings around him was striking. He was a mere man, small in stature compared to the massive warriors and ancient empires represented in the room. Yet in that moment he stood taller than any of them. Marcus paused, allowing his words to settle in the air. He wasn't sure if anyone would listen, but he had to try. We are not invincible, he continued, his voice growing more steady. We are not above the consequences of war. It will destroy everything, our civilizations, our families, our histories. And for what? So that we can continue the same cycle of hatred and violence that has plagued us for eons. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some species nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt like he was losing them. He had to do more, say more, and make them understand. He looked directly at the council chairperson, the Vortan, who had yet to speak. I'm just a human. I'm not a general, I'm not a diplomat, and I'm certainly not a warrior. But I've seen what war can do. I've seen it tear apart my own world, and I know it's something we can't afford again. Not for us, not for you, not for anyone. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could see the Vortan shifting in his seat, the large creature's brow furrowing in thought. The Zalthar, who had previously been one of the strongest advocates for war, glanced at the others, their antennae twitching nervously. The Tizoth, known for their cold, logical thinking, appeared to be evaluating Marcus's words as if weighing them in some vast mental scale. It wasn't just Marcus speaking anymore. It was the voice of reason, of compassion, and of humanity's resilience. And even if no one in the room had expected it, it was beginning to make an impact. Still, the resistance was fierce. A voice from the Kilari delegation broke the silence. One of their highest-ranking officials, a towering being with metallic skin and piercing green eyes. And what would you have us do, human? Sit idly by while our enemies grow stronger? While our people suffer? The Kilari's voice was laced with contempt, clearly unconvinced. Marcus felt the weight of their challenge, but he stood his ground. We don't have to sit idly by. We can take action, But it doesn't have to be war. We can find a way to heal, to rebuild, to negotiate. But that means letting go of our pride and our need for dominance. It means understanding that we are stronger together, not when we are divided. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The room was divided now, and the tension only intensified. There were those who seemed to consider his words, their expressions thoughtful and uncertain. But then there were others who were clearly set in their beliefs. They had been at war for so long that peace seemed like an impossible dream. The council chairperson, the Vortan, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke. His voice was deep, almost a growl, as he addressed Marcus directly. You speak of peace, human, but peace is not a luxury. It is a prize that must be fought for. The universe does not grant it freely. And you think that a few words will change centuries of conflict? Marcus did not flinch. No, he replied firmly. But I believe that if we are willing to listen, to truly listen to each other, we can create something new. A peace built on mutual understanding, not on destruction. A peace that doesn't just benefit one species, but all of us. The room was still now. No one spoke. For the first time, the council members were actually considering the humans' words. Was it possible? Could they all really come together and work for peace? Or was Marcus simply naive, dreaming of a future that could never be? The Vortan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room. The tension in the air was thick, and the stakes had never been higher. The war vote, which had seemed like a foregone conclusion, was now uncertain. Marcus Orwin, a single human, had thrown a wrench into the gears of galactic politics. But was it enough? Would the species of the galaxy be willing to listen? Or would they dismiss this human's plea as the naive idealism of a species that didn't understand the stakes? As Marcus stood there, his heart racing but his voice steady, he knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The real battle was just starting. And he was ready to fight for peace. The tension in the council chamber reached a boiling point. The air was thick with suspicion and uncertainty. The leaders of the galaxy, once united in their resolve to wage war, now found themselves facing a different kind of struggle. A struggle not for dominance, but for control over the very future of the universe. Marcus Orwin, the human who had spoken out against the vote for war, stood at the center of this storm. His words had begun to shake the foundation of the council. Some species, long divided by old grudges and hatred, were starting to question their motives. Others, more entrenched in their desire for war, were digging in their heels, unwilling to listen to a human who had no real stake in the conflict. In the midst of this growing division, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. He had started something he wasn't sure he could finish. The voices of those supporting war grew louder, their arguments becoming more heated. The council chairperson, the Vortan, had called for a vote earlier, but the debate was far from over. The situation was spiraling out of control, and it seemed that peace was slipping further and further away with each passing minute. The Kalari representative, a towering figure with gleaming metallic skin and piercing eyes, was one of the first to speak out, their voice cold and unforgiving. You speak of peace, human, but you do not understand the weight of the decisions we must make. You do not know the pain of seeing your people slaughtered, of watching your homes destroyed. Peace, as you call it, is a luxury we cannot afford. The words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. Marcus felt the sting of those words, but he did not back down. He had seen the destruction war could bring, and he knew there had to be another way. I understand more than you think, Marcus replied, his voice steady. I've seen the toll of war on Earth. I've seen families torn apart, entire cities reduced to rubble. The cost is too high, and I believe we can find a way to stop it before it's too late. But his words did little to calm the storm. The Tizoth, an ancient and highly logical species, regarded Marcus with disdain. They had lived through countless wars, and their cold, calculating minds were fixated on the idea that conflict was inevitable. Your naivety is almost admirable, human, one of them sneered, his red eyes narrowing. But you fail to understand the reality of our situation. The universe does not bend to wishes or desires. It follows the laws of power. And power, at this moment, lies in our ability to destroy. The words echoed in Marcus's mind, a chilling reminder of the deep-rooted belief in war that many species held. He could see it in their eyes, their unwavering belief that destruction was the only path forward. He had to break through this belief somehow. He had to show them that there was another way, that they didn't have to sacrifice everything just for the sake of power. The debate grew more intense as other representatives voiced their opinions, some in support of Marcus's call for peace, others vehemently opposing it. The room seemed to split in two, the atmosphere thick with hostility and mistrust. Species that had once been allies now faced off against each other, their long-standing relationships beginning to fray at the edges. Marcus watched helplessly as the arguments raged on. Each side seemed locked in a battle of ideologies, and the more they argued, the more they seemed to drift further apart. It was clear that the Council, once united in its quest for war, was now deeply divided. And, as the debate continued, Marcus could see the galaxy slipping further into chaos. The human had started a fire, but he wasn't sure he could control it. The Vortan, who had remained silent through most of the exchange, finally spoke again. His voice was heavy, filled with authority, and it carried across the chamber. "Enough," he said, his tone brokering no argument. "We will vote, but we must first hear the final arguments from both sides. The fate of the galaxy cannot be left to chance." The room quieted, the representatives turning their attention to the Vortan. The council chairperson's words held power, but Marcus knew that the final decision would not be made by him alone. It would be the council that decided. And if the war vote passed, there would be no turning back. The stakes had never been higher. As the Vortan motioned for the floor to be opened for final statements, the representatives from each side stood, preparing to speak once more. Marcus felt a surge of urgency. He couldn't let this moment pass. He had to make them understand. He had to make them see that war would not fix anything. It would only create more suffering, more destruction. "Please," Marcus called out, his voice rising above the murmurs in the room. "I don't want to see this galaxy torn apart. I don't want to see our children grow up in the ashes of what could have been. We have the chance to change this, to rewrite the future, but only if we can come together, united in our desire for peace." The silence that followed his words was deafening. It was as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the final decision. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest, each beat a reminder of how fragile this moment was. He could see the leaders of the different species, each struggling with their own beliefs and doubts. Some were beginning to reconsider their stance, while others clung to the certainty that war was the only answer. The struggle for peace had reached its peak. The fate of the galaxy was now in the hands of those who had the power to change it. Would they listen to the voice of humanity, the voice of reason, or would they continue down the path of destruction? The decision was coming, and Marcus could only wait, praying that his words had made a difference. The silence in the council chamber was so profound it almost seemed like time had stopped. The representatives, each a powerful leader from a far-flung corner of the galaxy, sat in uneasy stillness. Every eye was now fixed on Marcus Orwin, the human who had stood alone against the overwhelming tide of war. He had spoken of peace, of understanding, and of a future where they could all coexist. But despite his impassioned pleas, the debate had raged on, louder, angrier, until the entire council seemed divided into two irreconcilable factions. The vote was imminent. The fate of the galaxy rested on the decisions of these powerful beings who had seen centuries of conflict and betrayal. And Marcus? He stood there, no longer with the fire of defiance he had had when he first spoke, but with a quiet hope, a hope that something, anything, might still change. But deep down, a part of him feared that his words had been in vain. The Vortan chairperson, towering over the assembly, looked across the room, his deep-set eyes scanning the faces of those present. His voice, ancient and filled with a sense of authority, reverberated through the chamber. "It is time. The vote will be cast." We will decide whether this galaxy is to continue down the path of destruction or find a new path forward. A flicker of doubt passed through Marcus's mind. Was this the end? Had his words fallen on deaf ears? The representatives rose one by one, their faces steely and determined. One by one they cast their votes, their fingers hovering over the holographic screens before them. War or peace, those were the choices. Marcus held his breath, unable to shake the feeling that no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he believed in his message, it was all slipping through his fingers. As the last vote was cast, the holographic screens flickered to life, displaying the results in bold red letters. The room went completely still. War. 17. Peace. 14. The vote was close, far closer than anyone had anticipated. But it was still a victory for those who had been advocating for conflict. The cold reality of war once again seemed inevitable. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The galaxy was teetering on the edge, and this moment, this vote, seemed to seal its fate. But then, as the results flashed on the screen, a strange thing happened. The silence, the stillness in the air, broke. A single voice spoke, cutting through the tension. I abstain. It was the Kilari representative, the one who had been one of the strongest proponents of war. His words hung in the air like a bombshell. The room turned to face him, and for a moment, no one could quite understand what had just happened. The Kilari delegate, a being with gleaming metallic skin, now stood with an expression that was no longer filled with contempt. There was something else in his eyes, something like regret. I abstain, he repeated. After hearing the human speak, I realize that we've been blinded by our hatred, by our need for revenge. I've seen it in my own people. We have fought for so long that we've forgotten what peace looks like. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in it. A ripple of shock passed through the room as other representatives turned to one another in disbelief. How could this be happening? One of the strongest voices for war had just given up on the cause. The Vortan, who had been silent up until now, watched the Kilari delegate with a mixture of astonishment and curiosity. You abstain? He asked slowly, as if the word itself was foreign. Yes, the Kilari delegate said, his voice firm now. I choose to step aside. I cannot, in good conscience, vote for war. I've heard the humans' words, and I've seen the truth in them. We do not have to destroy each other. We can find another way. The room erupted in murmurs, some of shock, others of confusion, but many now began to speak in support of the Kilari's decision. The human had not stood alone after all. Slowly, one by one, more species, more delegates began to rise from their seats, declaring their own abstentions, or more surprisingly, voicing their support for peace. The tension that had gripped the room for so long began to break apart, piece by piece. Marcus's heart beat faster, each pulse a signal of hope that he couldn't fully believe until now. Could it be? Could the galaxy truly be on the brink of peace? The weight of the moment seemed almost impossible to bear. The Tizoth, once unwavering in their commitment to war, now stood silently, their red eyes searching the room. Slowly, a representative spoke. We have fought for so long, seeking power and destruction. Perhaps it is time we try something different. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. The Vortan chairperson, the very leader who had presided over the council, the one who had called for the vote and assumed war was inevitable, stepped forward. His massive form loomed over the room, and he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of countless years of rule. I have led my people through many wars. I have seen the cost of victory and the devastation of defeat. I have heard your voices, and I have seen the conviction in the humans' plea for peace. I am not too proud to change my mind. I, too, abstain. A wave of silence followed as the Vortan's words sunk in. It was as if a dam had broken. One by one, other species began to voice their support for peace, some with hesitation, others with firm resolve. The vote, which had seemed certain, was now no longer a question of, where it was a vote for redemption. The final vote was cast, and for the first time, the galaxy chose a new path. Peace was declared. The room erupted in a chorus of disbelief and joy. The representatives, their hands raised in a show of unity, cheered and celebrated. The alien species that had been on the verge of destroying each other now found common ground, united in the belief that peace could be achieved. Marcus, standing quietly at the center of the room, watched as the impossible became a reality. He had come to this council thinking that his voice would be lost, that humanity had no place among the great empires of the galaxy. But today humanity had not only been heard, it had changed the course of history. The redemption of the galaxy had begun, not through violence, but through words. And as Marcus stood there, he realized that perhaps, just perhaps, one voice really could change everything.